When you think about history, are there lots of old guys wearing wigs and stockings? When you think about history, is Napoleon really short? And folks have wooden teeth. Do you know that history can be the most incredible, amazing stories for you and me? Sit back and listen to a story right now. It's honest, it's fun, and it's sure to.
Hi, young historians. Welcome to another episode of Anytime Now. I'm Brooke, co-founder of Honest History. Are you as excited about this episode as I am? I sure hope so. We're about to dive into another story-filled adventure and learn something new. And remember, by learning more about the past, you can make a positive impact on the future. So pack your bags and let's go.
Have you ever watched the movie Bambi? It's one of Disney's earliest animated films. In fact, it's over 80 years old. Today, Bambi is considered a timeless classic, and in many ways that is thanks to one extraordinary artist. That artist's name is Tyrus Wong. Without him, the film would look very different. Born in China, Tyrus embarked on a daring voyage across the ocean to the United States when he was just 9 years old. With the help of his father, young Tyrus grew up to become a talented artist. This is the story of Tyrus Wong and his incredible journey from his home village to Walt Disney Studios. Our story begins in China in 1920. The steamship let out a loud whistle as it left the port. A 9-year-old boy named Tyrus leaned over the railing, waving goodbye to the people standing on the dock below. He looked up at his father, Luke Messimer. They were about to begin a long journey across the ocean. Tyrus and his father were sailing to the United States of America. Tyrus wandered around the huge steamship, marveling at its towering masts and many rooms. It was unlike anything he had seen in his home village, but he knew life from now on would be very different from his life in China. For the next few weeks, Tyrus and his father lived on the steamship as it sailed across the Pacific Ocean. During this time, Tyrus's father prepared him for their arrival. He handed Tyrus papers and told him to study them. Luke Messimer had written down many different facts on these papers for his son, facts that Tyrus needed to memorize and recite back to him. Luke Messimer told Tyrus that, when they landed, the immigration officers would ask him many questions. They'd ask Tyrus his name, his parents' names, and where he lived. They'd ask him where his parents grew up and if he had any brothers or sisters. Tyrus needed to say everything exactly as they were written on the papers. If he got anything wrong, he could be sent back to China. Luke Messimer knew just how hard it was going to be to enter the U.S. He knew how hard it had become for every Chinese immigrant. But it had not always been that way. In the 1800s, many Chinese people immigrated to the United States during the gold rush. Like others, they hoped to find gold buried in the rocks and rivers of California. Many of these Chinese immigrants were soon recruited to build the railroad. It was very dangerous and difficult work. However, once the railroads were completed, the Chinese immigrants began to feel very unwelcome in their new home. The U.S. government started to pass laws that limited how many Chinese people could move to the country. In 1882, it passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which put an end to most Chinese immigration. Chinese people who were merchants, teachers, students, travelers, or diplomats could still enter the country, but all other Chinese workers were banned. There was, however, one way these immigrants could still enter the country, and that was if they proved one of their family members was a U.S. citizen. Unfortunately, no one in Tyrus's family was a U.S. citizen. Luke Messimer knew how difficult it was going to be to enter the country, but he felt it was worth the risk. And so, like many other Chinese immigrants, he bought fake papers. These papers said that Tyrus was related to a Chinese American living in the United States. The U.S. government began to call people who used fake papers paper sons or paper daughters. Look Get was terrified that the immigration officers would suspect their secret, but it was his only chance at starting a new life in America. Tyrus memorized the words his father had written down for him. My father's name is Look Get, and my mother is Li Shi. I have 3 living older brothers, 2 in the States, and 1 gone back to China, Tyrus recited. In our village, there are 20 houses split into 5 rows. Our house is the second house in the middle row. Say it again, his father would say after Tyrus finished. After many weeks of studying, Tyrus finally spotted land in the distance. Their boat had reached California. The ship pulled into the port of San Francisco. Look Get grabbed their bags to leave, but Tyrus was not allowed to follow him. Unlike Tyrus, Look Get had been to America before. In fact, he had spent many years working in California as a merchant, but it was Tyrus's first time coming to this country, and, as a first-time immigrant, he had to go to a different place. Tyrus was pushed onto a smaller boat and sent to an island in the bay. As Tyrus stepped off the boat, he saw a large white building looming in front of him. It was the Angel Island Immigration Station. He nervously walked up the wooden dock towards the building. The other children on the boat told him he would see his father soon, but he was very afraid. The officers inside began a health check. They examined Tyrus and the other passengers for any illnesses or diseases. Then, the passengers were sent to rooms filled with bunk beds. Tyrus would have to spend many days and nights in the building before he could see his father again. It was common for people to stay there for a month or longer. Finally, on January 27, 1921, Tyrus was taken to a room for his interview. The 2 American officials sat across from him at a table and began asking him questions. Tyrus tried to remember everything he had studied on his father's papers. He knew he couldn't make a mistake. After answering 80 different questions, Tyrus breathed a sigh of relief. He had passed. He boarded a small boat to take him back to San Francisco and away from Angel Island. He would finally see his father again. He was going to begin his new life in America.
Hi friends, are you enjoying today's episode? I'd like to take a quick break from the story to tell you about another great place to learn about the past. Honest History creates magazines and books for kids that are filled with fun stories and activities that bring history to life. From pirates to spies to great inventions and so much more, you'll learn about interesting people, places, and events from around the world that made history. Created for kids ages 6 through 12, you can sign up and receive new adventures delivered straight to your doorstep every quarter. Just visit honesthistory.co. That's honesthistory.co to sign up today. Oh, and here's a special offer for our podcast listeners. Use code ANYTIMENOW for 10% off. Again, that special code is ANYTIMENOW. Okay, let's get back to the story.
When Tyrus lived in China, everyone talked about California and the riches they would find there. They called California Gold Mountain, but many immigrants soon discovered these riches were not as easy to find as they hoped. Chinese immigrants faced unfair laws and treatment in their new home. Many were not allowed to own property or gain U.S. citizenship. They also began to face prejudice in the towns and cities they lived in. But Look Get still believed that California was a land of opportunity. Back home in China, people struggled to feed their families, and life was uncertain. Look Get was hopeful he could provide a better life for his young son in America. After Tyrus was reunited with his father, the 2 boarded a train to Sacramento, California. They settled into a small room in the city's Chinatown. From there, Tyrus began to explore his new home. He went to school, joined the Boy Scouts, and played baseball. Look Get quickly noticed that his son was interested in art. Tyrus would often get in trouble at school for doodling in class. Look Get could not afford to buy any ink or paper, but he still found ways to encourage Tyrus. One evening, he handed Tyrus a brush and a cup of water. He showed him how to paint long, swirling strokes on an old newspaper page. This, he explained, was the art of calligraphy. Tyrus spent every evening practicing calligraphy, becoming more and more comfortable with a brush in his hand. At school, he began painting posters for school events. One day, his principal walked by and saw him working on one of these posters. "You might be able to win a scholarship to art school," he told Tyrus, impressed by his artwork. This was the first time Tyrus had ever heard about scholarships. Art school was very expensive, so it had always been out of reach. But if he won a scholarship, he would be able to go to school for free. To him, learning to draw and paint sounded like a dream. His principal told him about Otis Art Institute in Los Angeles, and Tyrus decided to apply. He soon got a letter in the mail from the institute. The letter told him to come in for an interview. Luke nervously took Tyrus to the institute's building in Los Angeles. He waited outside as his son pushed through the doors. Tyrus sat down at a long table where two men leafed through pages of his art. They paused as they looked at a drawing of a boat. Tyrus had drawn the steamship that had taken him to the United States. One of the interviewers was very quiet. He barely said a word. He didn't say yes or no. He didn't say good or bad. He just said, Tyrus remembered. But the men must have liked Tyrus's art. Later that day, he received the good news. He had won the summer scholarship. Tyrus raced out of the building to tell his father. He was going to art school. That summer, Tyrus learned all about drawing, oil painting, and watercolor. He quickly realized he wanted to learn about this for the rest of his life. He wanted to be an artist. When the summer scholarship ended, Tyrus begged his father to help him find a way to return to art school. Luke turned to his friends in Chinatown for help. "Can I borrow money to pay for Tyrus's school?" he asked. Many of the older Chinese men shook their heads. They did not think it was wise to spend money on an art school. But some of the younger men felt differently. They believed Tyrus had a chance. And so, these young men loaned Luke the $90 he needed to pay for Tyrus's first year of school. After Tyrus finished art school, he began his career painting advertisements. He also worked at a restaurant in Chinatown. The restaurant was called the Dragon's Den, and it was a popular spot for artists. There, he met the woman who would become his wife, Ruth. But life would soon become very difficult for people across the country. The Great Depression had hit the United States. Many Americans lost their jobs and homes. The Dragon's Den closed down, and like many others, Tyrus struggled to find work. He finally found a job with the Federal Art Project. This government program paid Tyrus a small salary to create paintings and watercolors during the Great Depression. But when this program came to an end, Tyrus found himself without a job once again. He told his wife Ruth the bad news. He did not know what to do next, but Ruth had an idea. "I heard Disney is looking for artists," she told him. At this time, Disney wasn't the huge company we know today. It was still a young artist studio, and it had only just made its first animated feature film. Tyrus decided it was worth a shot and applied. Weeks later, he reached into his mailbox and pulled out a letter. It was from Disney. He nervously tore open the envelope and pulled out the paper tucked inside. He scanned the letter, hoping to read good news. Smiling, he ran over to Ruth. "I got the job," he told her. In 1938, Tyrus stepped through the doors of Walt Disney Studios. But those first few weeks on the job were far from glamorous. Tyrus spent his days sketching drawing after drawing, flipping over page after page. He was what animation studios call an in-betweener. He drew the drawings that went in between the main frames of the animation. To him, in-betweening was very boring. He wanted to create something of his own, something that showed his talent as a fine artist. One day, he overheard people talking about Disney's next film. It was called Bambi, and it was an animated movie about a young deer and his forest friends. But the people said there was a problem with the film. None of the background art looked right. "This background has too many details," one of the artists complained. That evening, Tyrus went home and began making sketches of forests and trees. He showed them to a fellow Disney artist. It soon became clear Tyrus shouldn't be in-betweening. He should be painting the film's backgrounds. His paintings were brought to Walt Disney, the founder of Disney Studios. Walt took one look at Tyrus's work and said, "Tell all the Bambi artists to follow this artist's style." From then on, Tyrus was no longer an in-betweener. He was a background artist. He spent his days creating beautiful images of forests. Using long brush strokes, he painted the forest's tall grass and towering trees. When the audience watched the film for the first time, they marveled at its beautiful scenery. The following year, the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed, and Tyrus Wong was finally able to become an American citizen. Over the next 60 years, Tyrus continued to paint and design. After Disney, he worked at Warner Brothers Studios, where he made art for Hollywood films. He then created best-selling Christmas cards for Hallmark. He continued to explore different types of art, painting ceramics and designing colorful kites. Tyrus's life was beyond anything he had imagined when he was a boy sailing to America. Those first few weeks in the United States had been difficult and scary. He remembered the month he spent on Angel Island separated from his father. But with his father's support, Tyrus Wong transformed those experiences into an incredible life, a life filled with art. Today, if you watch Bambi, you can see just how much his paintings influenced the famous film. Bambi, as they say, was all in Tyrus's style.
Welcome back! What did you think of today's adventure? We hope you learned something new. Be sure to share the story with your friends and family, and use what you've learned today to go out there and make a positive impact on history yourself. That's all for now, but if you want to learn more about important and amazing stories from the past, be sure to subscribe to Honest History Magazine, where you'll discover stories from around the world. Thanks for listening. This episode was narrated by Randall Lawrence and written by Heidi Coburn. Production was led by Robot Pirate Media. To learn more about Honest History, visit us at honesthistory.co and follow along for updates on social media.